Ever had your CSS layouts throw a tantrum, items overlapping, things refusing to line up? Don't worry, we're diving into Flexbox. Think of it as the ultimate layout toolkit that makes aligning, resizing, and spacing fun. Yes, really. Let's turn those layout headaches into wins. From my experience, I can say that CSS Flexbox opens up a whole new way of approaching and understanding layouts in CSS. It will make you capable of creating beautiful and responsive layouts however you want. You will confidently solve typical CSS problems like how to align the elements, how to evenly distribute the spaces between the elements, or how can I make my website responsive with bare minimum code. All you have to do is set a reference point to your parent element. Any HTML element that holds any type of content inside can be a flexbox. In our HTML, we have these 5 boxes under flex container. By default, these boxes are block elements, meaning each item occupies full width of the frame. To make them flex items and align them efficiently, we need to set the parent container's display property to flex. By setting the value of flex to display property, we will force each item to align in one single row. Notice that each item used to come down one below the other, and now after setting the display property to flex, they are aligned in one single row. When working with Flexbox, you deal with two axes, the main axis and cross axis. The main axis is set by the flexdirection property, determining the flow of items. The cross axis runs perpendicular to the main axis. All Flexbox properties and alignments revolve around these two axes, so understanding them is key to mastering layout control. To position your elements anywhere across these axes, you need justify content and align items properties. So let's talk about justify content first. I will add some border so that we can see our frame, and then let me zoom out a little bit. Justify content has some basic values like flexi start, center, and flex end. Flexi start will align the elements at the start of the main axis. This is the default value, so if you add it or you do not add it, your elements will always be aligned at the start of the main axis. Center will align the elements to the center of the main axis, and flex end will align the elements to the right of the main axis. Justify content also has some advanced values like space between, space around, and space evenly. As how they work. If we use space between, then the items are evenly distributed along the main axis, with the first item at the start and the last item at the end, leaving equal spaces between each item. If we use space around, then items are evenly distributed but with equal space on both sides of each item, meaning the spaces at the edges are half the size of the spaces between the items. To solve this issue, we have space evenly value. This will distribute the spaces evenly. You can also use shorthand values like start instead of flexi start and end instead of flex end. But for now, I will keep it at center. So now we are done with the main axis, but what about the cross axis? For that, we have align items property, which allows us to control how items align along the cross axis. First, we will talk about the stretch value. Stretch is the default value and it stretches the items to fill the container along the cross axis. I have set the value to stretch, but nothing seems to happen. That's because there isn't enough space along the cross axis for the items to stretch into. So let me give it the height of 800 pixels. Still nothing happening. That's because it won't stretch if you have already set the fixed height on your flex children. So let me comment out the height. And now we have it, right? But let me put it back. Then we have flexi start. Flexi start aligns the items at the center of the cross axis. And you can also use start instead of flex start value. And then we have flex end, which aligns the items at the end of the cross axis. And of course, you can use end instead of flex end. Center, well, you guessed it, it aligns in the center of the cross axis. Now with this, we have successfully answered the globally asked question, how to center a div.
Yay!
By combining justify content for the main axis and align items for the cross axis, you can fully control the positioning of your flex items within the container. But there is one more interesting Flexbox property called flex direction. With flex direction, you can decide whether your items should flow horizontally or vertically, and even you can reverse the order. To understand it better, let me remove the align items and set the justify content to flex start. By default, flex direction is set to row, making it go from left to right. You can reverse it by setting it to row reverse. Now as you can see, the first item is 5 and the last item is 1. This is because we have reversed the flow. You can also make them go from top to bottom by setting the value as column. Now the direction is no longer row but instead column. And yes, you can also reverse the column as well. Now the first item is 5 and the last item is 1. But in most cases, you will only use column, so let's keep it that way. Now since we have switched the main and the cross axis, the align items and justify content properties will work differently. In order to align the items horizontally in the center, the justify content center will not work. But instead, align item center we need to apply it to. I believe by now you get the idea that understanding the direction in Flexbox is absolutely essential, as it fundamentally impacts how all other properties behave. In your development journey, you will often encounter such scenarios where you need to align content vertically, and that's where the flex direction property becomes a powerful tool to control your layout efficiently. I will remove layout controlling properties for the moment and discuss some other properties that controls how the layout behaves. The gap property, for instance, allows you to create consistent spacing between items without relying on margins. For example, I will give the value of 20 pixel. As you can see, there's a gap of 20 pixel between each item. Additionally, we have flex wrap property, which lets items wrap onto a new row or a column if there isn't enough space in a single line. This is another powerful property to create a responsive layout. Flex wrap has two main values, wrap and no wrap. Let's try adding wrap as an example. But we are not noticing any changes here. That's because there isn't enough content in this view to wrap to the next line. So let me add few more boxes so that our content overflows the viewport. Now you can see that when there isn't enough space for a box to fit in, it shifts down to the next line. But wait, there's some odd alignment happening here. Don't worry, we can fix this easily with another property called align content. Now at this point, I want you to remember the values we used to use with justify content. The same values we can apply here as well, be it space between, space around, or space evenly. You can also use and or start. All will work. And now our layout is elastically responsive. No matter how much you stretch or shrink, your layout will not break. And this is what we call a responsive design. Okay, so now let me move back to our previous example with 5 boxes and just the display flex property. There's a property called align self, and interestingly we apply it on flex children itself. For the example, I will set its value to end. Now my elements are at the end of the cross axis. Or I can apply center, and now all my elements are at the center of the cross axis. You will find such scenarios where you would want your element to be able to align itself independently. For that example, I will select the last child and give it AND value. As you can see, it is aligning itself at the AND. And now you can apply all the properties that we have seen previously. Well, this was only for the demonstration of this property, so now let me comment out this last child. Let's talk about two more properties in Flexbox, Flex Shrink and Flex Grow. When I shrink and resize my browser's window, you'll notice that the box is also shrink. That's because Flexbox uses shrink 1 by default, which means items are allowed to shrink to fit the container. Now if I set the flex shrink to 0, the content won't shrink anymore when resizing the browser. Instead, it will overflow, which can be useful scenarios where you want to implement scrolling behavior. As you can see, your contents are overflowing, but with this nice little scrolling behavior. On the other hand, we have flex grow property. If I set flex grow to 1, notice how box grows automatically as I increase the browser's width. This property allows items to expand and fill the available space dynamically. By combining these two properties, you can create flexible layouts. For instance, setting flex shrink to 0 and flex grow to 1 ensures the boxes grow with the browser's width. And when the width is reduced to a limit, scrolling takes over instead of resizing the boxes further down. And that's pretty much it for the Flexbox. Remember, learning the tools is just the beginning. How you apply them to design and transform your layouts is what matters the most. If you have any questions or need any help with the concept, drop a comment below. Till then, take care and I will see you in the next one.